The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So everyone should, good morning everyone. Organizers, you should mute yourself unless you're presenting. So good morning everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. We use a webinar series. Just do a quick introduction into the overall format. Today, this presentation is actually part of an ongoing series that we're doing every few weeks. So today we'll be talking about PublisherLT. Basically the format will be an introduction to present the product, an overview, and we'll do a demonstration of the product, as well as and Dennis will also be presenting some examples of work packages. I'll introduce the presenters in a moment. During the sessions, we are happy to take questions. If you could use the chat feature on the GoTo interface, that would be helpful, and we'll try to get to you when we can. We do want to be able to take questions during the session, but we also want to minimize disruption to the presentation. Try to keep it on topic and try to send your questions at the time during whatever's being presented. Furthermore, after the session, we'll be quite happy to take questions. You can go to the Algae Marine Forum. I'll present another slide that shows the URL for that, as well as if you're a ShipConstructor client, you can also submit your questions through Nexus. Be happy to answer them there as well. So today we're introducing PublisherLT. The introduction, I'll be presenting a few slides just to go over it. I'm the Senior Product Manager, Norman Eldridge. Zoe Fife, our Technical Product Manager, will do a hands-on demonstration. Dennis Moray, Chief Technical Officer, will also go over a number of work package examples. This helps sort of illustrate ways to use the product. And Chris Emerson's also available, our lead developer, for answering questions and answers online. So we'll begin. There's no doubt there's a lot of information required to build ships and other marine structures. This represents a massive amount of time, energy, and resources that's been invested to create the data and the marine information model. And this information can be leveraged throughout the organization. So that's where this product is satisfying the other needs for that information. Some of the key challenges to get that information is to get it in a consumable representation for other stakeholders or end systems. If it's a machine-to-machine, the data you need is not always in the representation you require. So for example, there are no PDFs within Marine Information Model, but it's easy enough to generate them if you know what you're doing. You may have heard about the Enterprise Platform. The Enterprise Platform is a new line of products from SSI and enables the enormous wealth of the information in the engineering information model, marine information model, to be leveraged by other departments across the organization. So I think today you'll see how we go about doing that, but also the mechanics of how to produce that. And we had a couple of goals when we began this initiative: empowerment. Basically what we mean by that is to develop a system where anyone in the organization, in any department, can access the information they need in a consumable format when they want it. In other words, they don't have to be ShipConstructor experts once the system is set up for their use. So empower each person to have the capability to always get the most up-to-date information in a format they can use when needed. No waiting and no interruptions. So we reduce and eliminate a lot of wasted hours. So we wanted this to be non-disruptive. So what we mean by that is contacting people, having to ask for information, manually process over and over, repetitive tasks, training of new staff to be able to access the system, this kind of thing. This non-disruptive goal allows any stakeholder to generate all the information required by themselves or multiple other stakeholders by selecting a single operation. So PublisherLT is one of the products underneath the umbrella of the Enterprise Platform. It's really a first in what we think will be a line of products, and certainly different configurations. PublisherLT allows you to gather, convert, and manipulate information in a product data model, commonly the ShipConstructor Marine Information Model, and save it to another location. And throughout this presentation as well as the demonstration, we'll sort of solidify what that really means. Mechanically, I guess you could say, Enterprise Publisher, the individual version is actually installed as a separate application. It runs beside ShipConstructor. It has its own GUI, allowing users to interact in a simple and intuitive way, we hope. There is absolutely no requirement for the user to know how to use ShipConstructor, although it does helpful when you're configuring new workflows and work packages. This allows any team to be able to run PublisherLT, and this is very important. The idea is that other departments can access this information. I should also say the persistent settings for consistent and repeatable results. So for example, once we set up a certain workflow, a certain type of output package, and we'll discuss that further, then it's repeatable and it'll be used by others in the organization on demand. A high-level overview of basic architecture, how things get set up. Use the load manager, where you can specify what your inputs are, essentially, your criteria. This determines the items you want to use, such as drawing parts, systems, assemblies, spools, others. This can be filtered by anything, so you can filter the organization. In the demonstration, you'll see what the GUI looks like and the filtering capabilities. But for example, you can get all the parts which are modified by Dennis in the last 2 days, and all the production drawings he updated in the last week. So you can do that kind of thing. A simple example would be that more common work would be select other parts, spools, other things. The next step is defining the operations. It's a collection of user-defined actions to execute on the specified input criteria. So we'll describe how that's set up and configured and during demonstration. But examples could be to generate your outputs so that you could be able to produce a DXF, a PDF, a STEP, PNG, whatever types of outputs you want, for example, for drawings and that kind of thing. It's not limited to that. So the architectures and workflow is fairly straightforward. Just a few scenarios. We'll discuss a few during the demonstration, and Dennis will also go through a few others. But typically your work package, you want to create a use case as a work package to owner, subcontractor. The client needs to deliver a package. This is where you could, PublisherLT could satisfy the need to be able to set up a standard package that you could just on a repeated basis run and generate your outputs, for example. Integration with the profile CNC, so being able to set it up, create the information, process it, and be able to spit out information for a CNC, for example. So we'll go over a number of examples of that. It's just the work package workflow illustrates really the overall workflow once you've got things set up. Anyone does access the ShipConstructor client in terms of software or user. Run through PublisherLT, so we have your configuration, your GUI, to set that all up, the generated information, specify your selection criteria. The information can be stored either on the network or local storage, so it's quite flexible in terms of where the information can ultimately be deposited. And then to the right here, we just have a number of sort of disciplines and packages that we're thinking about here. Some more examples of work package examples, the document management, where you need to assemble a number of model twigs, parts, viewable, your bombs, lifting and turning packages, production floor packages. Beginning to get a concept, hopefully, that you have your different stakeholders who have different information needs, and you can set up with PublisherLT a means to very quickly in a repeatable fashion be able to pull together a number of types of information from the Marine Information Model. And we'll discuss these in more detail as well. So really the idea is just some of the highest benefits here. Just about done with my introduction. Finds information quickly. PublisherLT allows a user to load information, drawing assemblies, parts, spools, and more by the specified criteria. This eliminates the time required to navigate and locate each and every piece of information. I'm sure many of you have had to over and over have to run a manual process to spit out some information that somebody needed. you're wondering, it'd be nice to be able to do this in a repeatable fashion. So the idea is this will really be a real time saver for that type of thing. It does enable, it'd be easy to think of this as just a fancy batch program. It's not. You can create information that you wouldn't be able to access by other means in addition. In terms of availability for this project, it's available now with ShipConstructor 2015. It does require an enterprise-enabled project. So similarly, if you're familiar with WorkShare, it's a similar sort of mechanism. You enable a project. Each user accessing a ShipConstructor project that has had PublisherLT operations perform on it, and each user running PublisherLT requires an EnterprisePlatform client license. So everybody needs to be licensed to use it. Operations performed by PublisherLT require the relevant ShipConstructor license. So for example, if you're trying to access and create a package from marine drafting, you need to have a marine drafting license, of course. Enterprise client licenses are purchased as annual renewable licenses, just like your others, and technical support upgrades and maintenance are included. So now I'd like to be able to hand this over to Zoe, who can begin a demonstration, so just give me a moment. Here you go, Zoe.
Hello, everyone. All right, so I will show a demonstration on PublisherLT that will bring in some of the information, a lot of the information of what Norman's just spoken on. First off, I'm going to open PublisherLT using its independent executable. All right, so what you see when you first open PublisherLT is the project screen. You have to choose the project that you want. As Norman just mentioned, it has to be EnterprisePlatform enabled, and the way you would do that is by coming into ShipConstructor, going to Manager, connecting to the same project, and then in here you will see EnterprisePlatform, and when you go down in here you would have to click it Enabled. And then once you've done that, your project is now EnterprisePlatform enabled, and you can open it using PublisherLT. So now that we've done that, we have PublisherLT in front of us. First off, you want to set your output directory. So this will be the location where all the operations that you perform get stored to. By clicking on it, you would open up the location where you'd want it. In this case, I've created a folder called Publish Files inside of my project folder. Once you select it, it will actually set the link down here, the path, and that becomes a clickable link that will then open up to where the location is, where all the files will be stored. It's just a quick, easy access. With your project selected and your output folder determined, we now want to choose the items that we're going to perform operations on. You do that using the Load Manager. The Load Manager, as you can see, has a number of different ways in which you can access the items you want to place into PublisherLT. There's parts, assemblies, drawings, and spools. I'm actually going to go through each of those individually in a moment. You can also choose items based on the systems that you've built into your ShipConstructor project. There are also operations that are cross-project performance, and I will do a demonstration on that in a little bit as well. For task changes, that is related to the tasks that you create inside of ShipConstructor. So once you've added a number of tasks and you have users that are assigned to those tasks and are performing activities, any of the actions that they perform on parts inside of ShipConstructor can then be, that information can then be pulled out using the task changes. And the load criteria XML, this allows you to pull, to determine the items and the actions you want to perform on those items. Actually, not the actions, apologize. You pull out the items, you can then put those into an XML file and then open that anytime you so choose, so that you don't have to keep reselecting those items again. So for instance, say you wanted to have all the parts in a unit. Well, the unit has been predefined, but the parts might be changing. You might add some, you might remove some, delete them, whichever, but you always want to have only the parts in that unit. Well, you can write a script in a file to those actions and then save that file, and then you can continually reload it using this command. But for the time being, let's choose some parts. So when you select the parts button, you can see that there's a number of different ways in which you can access the parts you want to choose. In all cases, you can use SQL scripts and GUIDs. Here you can also do it individually by assemblies, drawings, spools, UDAs. Here we're just going to do it by selecting some specific items. As mentioned earlier, you can filter on anything. So you can filter based on name, you can do it based on type and subtype. Here I'm just going to choose some. Let's choose a pipe support. Let's get ourselves a plate. We can do a pipe, and let's get ourselves a stiffener. So once I've chosen those items, they'll appear here in PublisherLT. I'm going to go back in the Load Manager now and pick an assembly. Once again, I'm going to do it based on specific, but you can see here that you can choose user-defined attributes, dataset properties, SQL scripts, and GUIDs again. Selecting specific. Let's go down through the product hierarchy tree. So you can see here that it immediately opened up the product hierarchy. And I'm just going to go down through here so I can choose that assembly and a couple panels. Okay. By selecting OK, again, you can see that those have been added to my list. Going back to the Load Manager, let's choose some drawings. And what appears is something similar to the navigator. Here you can filter based on unit if you wanted to shorten the list, or even based on drawing type, so that you can quickly determine which files you want to actually select. Here we're going to choose a couple frames, frame 66, 83, and how about a couple assembly drawings? All right, selecting those. And now last, let's choose some spools. So again, there's a number of different ways that this can be done. In this case, I'm actually going to go through systems, and I'm going to choose a system set. So that'll give me all the spools that are inside of the system 642, which happens to be what? Oh, deck wash. Okay, so there is my list of spools. Once you've selected your items, it's time now to decide on what operations you want to perform on each of the items. You can do this in a grouping manner or on a line-by-line, like an item-by-item case basis. So by selecting the row that highlights the grouping, that means that whichever operation I select will be applied to everything in that group. Here you can see a list of all the operations that we currently have for parts. This list comes from the operations.xml file, and it is quite an extensive list. This can be added to, modified, however you so choose. In this case, we're going to use just one action that we created for this project. It'll pull information out of the BOM definitions, and I will talk to you a little bit more about that later. For assemblies, we're going to do something similar. Again, you can see this is actually, in some cases, is a different list, because what I'll show you in the operations.xml file is that some of these operations are specific to the items, and some are more universally applied. For drawings, we'll do something a little bit more interesting. You can already see that there's quite a long list of available actions. We'll do an export DWG on all of them. We'll create some Navisworks files and some JPEGs on all of them. And then what we'll do here is we will select just these two and add in PDF. And then for the spools, we'll just do a spool properties. Okay, so I've added a number of actions, and now you'll probably want to know a little bit more about the operations.xml file. It is a user-specific file, and it's customizable. It already has in it an extensive list of actions as supplied by SSI, but that list can be updated, modified. Items can be shrunk down. For instance, if you are an individual who only is interested in the output accessible for an ERP, then you might actually want to cut the list down to simplify the process, and then that way you know exactly what actions you want to perform. Because it is user specific, it's actually stored inside the user folder. So I've opened up the C drive. I'm going into the user account now, and you'll see that there's an SSI folder in here, ShipConstructor 2015, and here's an EnterprisePlatform folder. Opening this up, you can see the operations.xml file. Opening this with Notepad, you can see that it looks somewhat overwhelming initially, but it's actually quite readable once you have an opportunity to see what you're looking for. So for instance, right here, it has the export DWIG command. It says operation ID equals export DWIG. That is the command that we've just applied to some of the drawings. Down here you can see the Navisworks for model space, JPEG for model space, or JPEG for the layouts. If you then expand the script, this tells you what is actually being performed when that action is being run. So you can see here that there's the ShipConstructor command. There's information about how the file name will be stored, that will be written, where it'll be stored, all this types of stuff. And let's do that. And as I said before, it's a quite extensive list. There's a lot of information in all this. Before I mentioned about how some actions are only applicable to certain items, that's where you can see this right here. It says applies to equals parts. So this export part to drawing, that would obviously only apply to a part. So if you couldn't run this command on an assembly, for instance. Are there any questions about the operations.xml file? Okay, perfect. Then let us go through to running this through. So what one would typically do is once you've chosen your items and you've chosen your operations, you then hit the run button. In this case, I'm going to perform a demonstration on that. Oh, someone has a question. Why do we need to know about that file? So I'm being asked, why do we need to know about the operations.xml file? It's because it's inside of this file that the information, that the actions are actually created. So if you wanted, for instance, to add to one, so let's say you wanted to be able to create a subfolder where the information was being stored because you wanted to do it on a daily basis or a weekly basis or whatnot, then you could actually write that into that operations.xml file. So you can actually personalize the actions that are there. And so it's not a read-only file. It's actually a writable file. So that's one of the reasons why PublisherLT is so powerful, is that gives you this control to be able to create and modify all these functions. Now let's run through. So if I were to hit the run button, you would start seeing this sort of action happening. ShipConstructor will start to open. You'll have a couple instances of it in order for it to be able to run through all the activities in a timely manner. And you can actually see it performing some of the actions that we've requested of it. Once this is completed, I'm going to run it to the end so you can see what What you can see here is the PublisherLT progress window. Once it has completed all of its actions, you would actually see them here under the status. And while it's still running through everything, you can see what items are still being run through and what the operations are. This will also let you know if there are any errors or how it completed all of its operations. Now let us look at what some of the outputs are from having run through this. Can run through, let's let's look at this right here. So we can open up, looking at this, you can see a PDF of one assembly, or not. What's happened here? All right, hold on a second. Okay, sorry. I'm just going to run through this actually right now because I want to show you, and it looks like some of the information is not actually supplied. So you'll actually get an opportunity to see this in progress. So you can actually see how it's running through everything, and it's just doing it for this one assembly. So it will be creating the PDF, the JPEG, the Navisworks, that type of thing. Okay. Oh, interesting. And I can answer any questions right now if there are any. No? Okay.
So you could elaborate just a little bit. There's been a few questions. I've been answering them. Just in terms of the XML file,
Okay.
do they need to do, who uses that, and can that be expanded on in terms of functionality and that kind of thing, and then the users, whether they need to view that or not. If you could just elaborate a bit more on that.
All right, I will probably leave that to Dennis a little bit more afterwards, but I can talk to that for one moment. Is that a user does not have to access that operations.xml file. What that really is about is the accessibility of that information and how it can be modified. But if all you are interested in doing is running the actions that are already existing in PublisherLT, so if let's open up the drawings. So if you wanted to, for instance, have an export, like do export of a large group of drawings, then you can just come in here, you can select this, you can run it, and you never have to even look at the operations.xml file. So for those who are not script inclined, then that it's not a file that you have to worry about. For those of you who are looking at this and saying, oh wow, I can see how this can be valuable, but I might want to tweak this a little bit. So rather than like right now, we output information, like the parts properties information is a TSV file, so it's a tab delimited file. But maybe for some reason you want to make that comma delimited. Well, you could actually go into that function inside of the operations.xml file, and you could modify it so that the output would actually be comma delimited instead of tab delimited. That is a very simplified example of what you can do with the operations.xml file, but it's really just an indication of how it can be altered, but it doesn't have to be. Does that help? Hopefully. Okay.
Yes. And
okay.
I've got one question. We can export information to XLS.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, and I'll show a little bit about one of those as well. So what we can show here is if we open up a PDF file, sorry, opening up the drawing first. So here's the drawing of an assembly, and then the PDF of it, which is the layout. You've got, there you are, and then a Navisworks file. So that'll open up Navisworks directly, and we can see what it looks like inside. All right. Okay, so now that you've had an opportunity to see how you select the project, set the output directory, decide on the items you're going to use in PublisherLT and the operations you're going to perform, I want to go over a little bit of what, like the power in here. So for instance, we can batch generate PNG, bitmap, JPEG, PDF, and Navisworks files. We can export BOM tables to XML from any AutoCAD drawing. So again, this would be from a model drawing, a production drawing. This is useful in ERP. And so any table that would be in these drawings is can can be pulled out into TSV type files and all that type of thing. Export part, assembly, and spool properties to TSV files, and I will give you an example of this and how useful it can be with respect to changes made in ShipConstructor. You can generate transient output drawings. A transient output drawing is a non-updatable drawing to which you can add any part. So for instance, say you had a compartment that you wanted to depict, but it didn't actually exist in a model drawing. What you could do is you could select all the parts, the assemblies, whichever you needed to put together to create this output drawing as a one-off type of drawing to supply to somebody. You can batch update model and production drawings using this would use the update DWG command, and you can batch generate model and production drawings using the export to DWG command. So while these can obviously be done separately, they're also useful to be done together. And PublisherLT could be, a script could be written in such a way that it would first update and then export this set of files in one go. You have the ability to create multi-format work packages in one operation. Norman already gave a number of examples of that in his presentation. I believe that Dennis will give some examples as well of outputs for this type for work packages. You can publish assembly drawings to a multi-sheet DWF, DWFX, or PDF document following the product hierarchy. So this is like your friendly neighborhood IKEA or Lego type of instructions. So what would happen is you'd end up with one document on where each sheet by sheet would be that assembly drawing as it's being built up. And you can generate a separate AutoCAD drawing for each part. You can generate a DXF file of a part for profile cutting machines. The file will store all the required information for the cutting machine, and this is quite a boon for those who are already using it because it replaces a process that is both time-consuming and complicated. And you have the ability to run previously written or newly created AutoCAD scripts. So for those of you who already have a set of scripts and they're sitting there and you don't want to lose what you already have from that work, then that can be ported over to PublisherLT. And it also means that for those of you who are script inclined, that you can write those scripts and continue to use that sort of power inside of PublisherLT. Now, right, I promised you that I would give an example on the parts properties and how those can be used. Okay, so opening up ShipConstructor for a second. And oops. Okay. So the parts properties file, okay, ignore that. And cancel. So opening up the parts property.tsv file, it looks like this. We've got a number of pieces of information of each of the parts that we had selected in PublisherLT. If we open up ShipConstructor now and go to the manager, and we go through to the BOM bill of materials area and we open up the enterprise platform parts BOM definition, you can see that the list that's here is the same as the list that is supplied here. But let's say that you have this file and then you realize that the requirements have changed, you need certain pieces of information that hadn't been originally supplied. Rather than having to go to someone and asking them to write another script to pull that information out of the database, you can actually just right here say add whatever fields you're looking for. So for instance, let's add drawing path, go OK. You can apply that information, go back into PublisherLT, and then right here you can select just the parts, and the operation is again part properties demo, and we will run this. And what it will be doing is it'll be pulling that information out of the ShipConstructor database again, this time with the new field added. So that only took a moment. Show you a little sneaky trick. So right here we're in the progress window. And down, normally you'd see the operations and what's been completed, but there's a number of different tabs, and the output tab will actually tell you where the file is stored, and you can just double click right on it and it will open up that file. And now you can see that the drawing path has been added. So when you compare that to the BOM definition in ShipConstructor, you can now see that they once again match. Any questions about that? Okay, perfect.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, now I mentioned earlier as well that inside the load manager, besides you being able to choose items based on parts, assemblies, drawings, spools, you could also do project, overall project operations. So when I click project, you can see that we already have 4 actions available to us. In this case, I'm going to choose the part creation deletion info. And what you'll notice is down at the bottom, you've got the project and it says SSI, part creation deletion information. I'm going to uncheck this. I will run PublisherLT once more. And what this will be doing is, again, pulling information out of the database, and it's going to be collecting all the creation deletion information for all the parts in the ShipConstructor project. So we can do this again. Right. If you open up this, we have the GUID, creation date, deletion date. We've got 35,000 line items. And you can see here that if the deleted date is null, then the item obviously hasn't been deleted yet. If the creation date is null, it's because the creation revision information has been deleted. But that was a very quick way to pull that information out. And then the one last thing I wanted to mention was this button up here, Load External Drawings. So the Load Manager will allow you to pull information directly out of the ShipConstructor project to which you're connected currently. However, you may also want to be able to pull information out of a drawing that is just an AutoCAD drawing. So when we mentioned before about being able to take the BOM tables out of a drawing and store that as an XML file. You can do that for AutoCAD native drawings as well, and you do that by clicking the Load External Drawings, selecting the AutoCAD drawings you wanted, and then you could perform similar actions as what you're doing with the ShipConstructor drawings. And I believe that that is it. Shall I pass it over to Dennis then? Oh, there's a question. There's a question about why it's launching 2014. It is using ShipConstructor 2015, but it's on AutoCAD 2014. That's why you're seeing the 2014. Okay. I'll change the presenter then to Dennis.
Hello everybody. Actually, I'm going to add my video for a bit just so you can see me in person, because I haven't seen many of you guys for a while since I missed the user conference. So hello everybody, and that's pretty much it. I'm going to shut that off so I have a bigger screen here. So portion of my presentation, what I want to do is kind of give you an idea of how you can actually use it. So some of where the rubber hits the ground, as you can say. And I know a lot of you guys are looking at the presentations that Zoe and Norman did and can really get an idea of how you can actually leverage this into your organization. My only advice to you really is to think bigger. And the reason I say this is because we've been presenting PublisherLT for probably roughly around a year. And I'm not sure how many of you guys know, but we've released this in the technical preview, so we had it released to everybody that anybody could use at no cost with absolutely no obligation. So it really gave us a good way to get customers to actually use this, the product, as well as give us feedback and allowed us to iterate without having the burden of purchasing the product. So I would probably say that the PublisherLT is probably one of the best products developed internally as well as externally from a customer engagement and participation. So when I say think bigger, I want you to start thinking of the output that your department generates. And think of like all the output that you contain within your department, such as NowsWorks files, printing PDF files for your for other departments, for drawings, as well as other customer requirements such as STEP, SATA files, and native DWGs that we use quite often. And then also think about all the output that is generated from other departments. So these other departments that come to you and ask for information from your project that can be very disruptive or just even as part of your workflow. So they can be from your production floor, obviously, to get your output from your work packages. Your lifting and turning, management always requests reports, so generating reports for them. CNC machines such as your profile bending machine, as well as your production engineering reviews, getting documents for that. Subcontractors, a lot of times you have to create information for subcontractors that contains information from your model, but you don't want to give all the IP, so you just want to have, for example, the solid representation without all the properties or the build sequence or anything like that. So really protecting some of your IP when you're working with various subcontractors. FEA analysis, painting, and even weight management. So there's a lot of other departments that come and ask for this information that's contained in ShipConstructor. So what I want to start off here, actually I'm just going to go to this image that Norman had in his presentation and really focus on this criteria. So on the examples I'll be showing you is like there's many different ways that you can access criteria and why you actually want to perform a certain action on certain items. So these default ones that we have that Zoe was showing, such as parts, assemblies, drawings, and so forth, these are really just the stocked items. These are probably the main items that you'll use, but there's a lot more criteria that you can actually do. This filter by anything really does mean filter by anything. So examples would be, say for example you wanted to create some output or some representations of data of a weapon system with all its supporting structure. So you want to get all the piping as well as all the supports and any foundations of that, and to create a drawing from that or create some reports from that information or some PDF files. Or if you want all parts that are contained within a zone or compartment and create some output from that, that you can actually create those filters. And one that I'll show you shortly in one of the work packages I created is that I actually created a filter or a criteria that would filter on all the parts that have changed in the last week. And I was able to create different output from using that criteria. And again, I can use absolutely anything if I wanted to get just the parts that have changed in a particular compartment or zone by Joe. I would be able to get that output. So there's really a lot of power in how we select this information. We didn't constrain it at all. There's a lot of flexibility. So I guess the next thing I'm going to show you is some of my operations that I've created. So if I select my drawings and I go to my operations, these are all the operations that I have. So as you can see, they're quite a bit more than what Zoe was showing you. And I don't want to, I guess one thing to note here is that even though there's a lot of operations here, and within an organization there'll be a lot of operations, each user will probably only have 1, maybe 2, or even 5 operations that they would use often. But through the whole organization, because you have different operations for different departments, so for example, your weight management department would have a specific operation that only creates the output that they're interested in. Your engineers would have their operations, production planning would have their own operations. So you can create all these operations in your organization, but it is very individual or department focused. You can have them focus on themselves, on their own departments. And the benefit from that is it really starts reducing noise. Is that when someone comes, they pick their criteria, which is, they've done their assembly unit or their system, you want them to have very few options to actually select. So make sure that they're doing the right thing. So for example, some of the work packages that I've created or operations down here, that you can kind of see, is that I have these operations that if I was an engineer and I was done my task or my ECO, that I would just have to select this one operation and it would generate me all the information that I want. So it's not an operation per output, it's an operations for as much output as you possibly can want from the input criteria that you actually have. So let's see here. Let's look at some of this output just so you guys can have an idea of what it actually generates. I'm not going to go through the motions of actually generating this information because it takes a little bit of time. And the cool stuff, even though it is cool, it's actually what is generated is the end result that we're actually looking for. So in my operation, as you can see in my PublisherLT somewhere, that I have a folder called published files. And that's just within my project, my ShipConstructor project. So in my operation, when I select any of these operations, I actually want to create a little bit more of a file structure. So since I'm generating a lot of data, different types of data, I want to give it some structure. So from the operation, I created a date as my parent folder. And then I actually created another folder called work package. And then in here, I have all the work packages that I actually generated. So remind you that I select one operation and it can generate all this output that you're going to see. It's not multiple operations. So let's look at through some of these outputs that I've generated. Say ERP. So I broke it down a little bit more. So the ERP, obviously, I want a bill of materials, which creates me a Excel file or a TSV file of all the data in that bill of materials for the ERP system. But also I want to get parts. I want to get a DWG representation of each part. So here I can actually generate an AutoCAD drawing that only has the parts. And from that I can actually generate a PNG or image file. So this is actually all the parts that I actually have selected, just a particular output that I have. So it really depends on your ERP integration if you require it or not. But you can kind of start seeing the power of the enterprise platform here in the PublisherLT. If I look at some other work packages, my FE analysis package. So this is where we start using a unified model or a transient model. But technically what this FE really does is it really starts removing detailing. So if you do FE analysis, a lot of times you want to remove detailing such as your flanging, your corner treatments, some end cuts, just to improve the processing of your FE analysis. So what it does here is I selected my parts as my criteria, whatever that is, again by unit, by zone, compartment, or any other attribute that's in ShipConstructor. And then I generated a drawing that has ShipConstructor components, but also I generated a drawing that is pure native AutoCAD files. So this drawing here is just, it represents all those parts in just its solid and polylines and text representation. So I need no ShipConstructor to open it. So it's very easy to import into an FE application. I also created a SATA file, that was one of the requirements to integrate into one of these FE applications. Other work packages, lifting and turning, where I create the same type of ShipConstructor FE application. I also created a step version of that drawing, as well as, because my lifting and turning, I needed to create a bill of materials. So here, if I open up my bill of materials, you will see that I have a specific bill of materials for just this operation. So even though it's called, I call all my TSV files parts TSV, but each one has a different BOM. So this BOM for my lifting, turning, and my weight management really focuses on CGs and extents and volumes and weight. So each one can actually be quite different. So if we go to the different work packages, outfitting, planning, and production, which is a kind of neat one that I have here. So if you look at planning and production, a lot of times they need, if they were able to visualize the build sequence, if you think of communicating between engineering and production, visualizing the build sequence becomes a very powerful way to make sure everyone's on the same page. You compare that by just looking at the model and looking at your product hierarchy. It takes, some skill or experience to understand how your build sequence is coming together. So if you can actually automate that, becomes very powerful. And so what I do with this work package is I create a build strategy MS project file that can be imported into Navisworks, as well as a selection set which is required for Navisworks to do the simulation, as well as I create all the Navisworks files. So this right here has all the information that the planning and production would need to do the simulation. So they didn't have to ask engineering for this data. Engineering didn't have to actually spend time to generate this information. It's pretty much they're empowering themselves, and that's one real key benefit that we have with the PublisherLT is that it can automate and improve what you're doing, but it also can actually now let other departments that are asking information from engineering to help themselves, and that's really where there's a lot of benefit here. So if you want a little bit more information how this build sequence works, you can always just look at my my blog. I created a video of actually how you can, step by step, how you can actually create that simulation through Navisworks. Another one here, PLM PDM. I know there's a lot of integration with PLM PDM systems these days. And if you think of, there's a lot of data that has to go into PLM PDM systems. And having someone to go and generate all this information after you've done your work package is tedious and takes a lot of time. It's surprising how much time that takes. And then if there's a late change, which there's always those late changes, going back and generating all that information or trying to identify which drawings, which parts, which Navisworks model I have to update takes a lot of time. But with Publisher, this can actually happen virtually automatically. You just select the operation and it will generate your output. So for PLM PDM systems, I again broke it down into two directories. Just this is what I broke it down to. Anybody can break anything down to whatever structure they would like. And in drawings, what I have here also is I have different output for different drawings. And this is all, again, all contained in the operation. From the user using PublisherLT, they do not see any of this complexity. This is already all set up in the operation. So what I do here is that if I am processing an assembly drawing, I generate this output. I generate a bill of materials, I generate a DWF file, a pure native AutoCAD export file, a PDF version of the assembly drawing, as well as PNGs, which this is just really for representation purposes. But you can kind of see that I went through all my outputs and printed out all my assemblies. And I'm not going to show you this very well because my labeling is not very good. As well as I created a different type of BOM as well. But if you look at what I did for the planar group model drawings, so the structure drawings, is I have a different type of output that's generated. So I have the same type of export drawing of my planar group, a PNG as well of all my planar groups, but also my Navisworks. So I would want to generate my Navisworks of just my model drawings, not of my assembly or arrangement drawings or spool drawings. So it can actually have logic in your operation to identify what is my input and generate different output depending on that. So, yeah, so what's next here? Yeah, so you can kind of, I think you get the idea of the output that I'm actually generating here and weight management and different types of outputs that I generate. What else did I want to show here? Oh yeah, so those are kind of the idea of when you think of generating this information. Actually, one information I didn't really explain very well, which is, I go to, actually I'll explain it here. So another type of operations that I have here is step with layer. So in this case, I wanted, or the client wanted to create a step file that had all the parts, but all the parts were on a specific layer. And this just was helping with some type of integration that they were using. So I was able to create a script or an operation in relatively no time to create it. I have this Navisworks Lite, which is probably the operation I use the most. And if you kind of think of like when you create Navisworks models, creating Navisworks from ShipConstructor is relatively trivial, but there's always that issue where if you have a user that was hit a part in a Navisworks file, and you create a Navisworks file from that, or an NWC file from it, then now that part that they hid while modeling is now not shown in Navisworks. And that could be a huge issue. So the way that I have my Navisworks Lite version created or set up is that it will go through all the drawings that I've set up to create my Navisworks file and set the options that I want to be, or all the options I want to use to create my Navisworks. So for example, I disable or hide center lines, flow directions, I unhide all parts, I remove my XREPs, I remove part views, and so forth. And then I create a Navisworks file from an NWC file. And the benefit from that too is that I don't even have to save that drawing after. So I'm not modifying the original drawing. So I can execute this, set my drawing options, create my Navisworks file, and leave the drawing as is. So if you think of other departments that require a very clean Navisworks model, a lot of times management or other departments want to get a particular portion of the model, and you want them to have these settings, but you don't want them to modify the drawing, you can use the similar operation that I have here as my Navisworks Lite. And this is one of the latest ones I've actually created in the last a month. And it was really, the issue was the client wanted to find, to do certain actions on the parts that have changed in the last week. So if we kind of look into here, so this is, I guess what I'll show you first. Well, so as we're talking about the criteria, and you can filter on absolutely anything, the way I created this work package is I filtered on only the parts that have changed in the last week. And that's what I do my operations on. So the way that I did my operations, or the output that I actually created from that input, is I first created Navisworks files. So I got all the, not just so much parts, but all the drawings that were changed by my team, or myself in this case, in the last week, and I created Navisworks files so I can get a very quick visual representation of that file. I created a unified parts model. So this is where we kind of talked about the transient project or transit file, but it's really a way to aggregate all the parts that you've selected in your PublisherLT in your criteria. And what this does is it actually was able to create a single drawing of all the parts that have been modified. So I created a drawing, also an export drawing, as well as a PNG. So this PNG is an image of the drawing that I created. So this drawing does not exist in ShipConstructor, but the information does. And those transient drawings become very powerful when you need to create drawings that do not exist yet in your project. So a lot of times when you're looking at passing information, you're always, not always, but there's a lot of cases where you use assembly drawings or your assembly structure. But sometimes you have to pass an assembly drawing or Navisworks of your assembly with a bill of materials, but your assembly drawing is not created. That's not an issue with PublisherLT. You can select those parts that are within that assembly and create that visual representation, that drawing, to pass off to anyone or to your own team for any other processes that you have. So in this case, where I created a drawing, a drawing and an image of just the parts that I've changed in the last week. So it's, as you can see, I kind of slacked off in the last week, didn't really change very much. What else do we have here? I guess one last thing that I just Oh yeah, also I have I created a TSV file. Again, this is all in the same operation. And what this TSV, which just opens natively in or Excel, is that it gives me all the parts and gives me when they were modified, when they were last modified. Where's the date here? Gives me when they were last modified. I created so I actually have the days since it's last changed. So this one was this part was changed 94 days ago. This one over a year ago, and so forth. As well as I have information here of the reason why that revision has changed. So this part has been modified. It was modified because the mark-on style changed. This part was modified because the part assembly has changed. And it has this for all my parts in my project. And there's many use cases or uses that you can use from this. And one way that I've used it with this, as well as additionally, and if you want to get more information, I would probably refer you to my blog post next week, is that I was able to create now a Navisworks model that used the revision history of my parts, and I was able to create appearances. So if I wanted to have a visual appearance or make all my parts that have changed in the last week green, I was able to do that. If I want to then change everything that's changed in 2 weeks orange, I was able to do that as well. And then I can even actually get into a little bit more creative stuff, that if I want all parts changed by Joe to be purple and everything changed by Jim to be red and so forth, you can create a lot of these appearances that's within Navisworks. So again, this just gives you a visual and interactive way to look at the data or to change data in your project. So it becomes pretty powerful. And the last thing I want to talk about, and I think when we usually talk about the PublisherLT, everybody thinks of scripting. And scripting is, PublisherLT does scripting, does it fantastic. But it's really just a small portion of what PublisherLT does. Yet it can actually be a very powerful thing that PublisherLT does. So some of the scripting things that I did is, for example, there's one use case where a client was having issue with Navisworks, where it was generating a Navisworks file, but one drawing was out in space. And the reason for that was that the drawing units of that drawing wasn't set to, in this case, millimeters. So what I did is I just created an operation that set the drawing units to millimeters, selected all my drawings in my project, click run, got a copy, came back, everything was set. Another case was my part views, which is a relatively new feature in ShipConstructor. I wanted them to be transparent. And the reason I wanted them to be transparent is so that I knew those parts weren't actually in the model drawing. So they were transparent, very similar to XREFs or M-links. So I was able to set that property in my operation, selected all the drawings, and that was pretty much it. Other ones was opening the drawings and removing XREF from part views just to clean up my drawings, so that I know there's a lot of people that have processes that once you get out of a drawing, you have to make sure you remove your XREFs for the next person that's coming into the drawing. So doing this would do it automatically. So pretty much all it does is it opens the drawing, removes the XREF, removes any part views, and saves the drawing. And there's many other ones that I have here, but those are kind of the ones that I just created relatively recently. So that pretty much kind of goes through a very quick overview of some of the output that I've generated. I do want to mention that every time I do present this, and I'm sure we'll probably get some questions after this, and of new use cases. There's just so much the PublisherLT can actually do, and we haven't even thought of all the use cases, but the flexibility in the way that we developed PublisherLT, it pretty much can solve a lot of problems, if not all the issues that you have of trying to generate information from ShipConstructor. So the really way to think of PublisherLT is that anytime you want any representation of information from the Marine Information Model from ShipConstructor, the PublisherLT will be able to generate it. And it doesn't matter if there's a drawing of that component, it can actually create those types of drawings if you need it, as we're kind of mentioning before. Another thing also is with PublisherLT, as you can see, when you're using PublisherLT, there's not really any knowledge of ShipConstructor that you need to know. So when you're looking at, production planning, which is some of the plans that we're kind of looking at, implementing it, is what they do is that they just open up the PublisherLT. They know how to load their criteria because it has that product hierarchy, which everyone's familiar with. It's not really a ShipConstructor feature. And they select their 1 or 2 operations that they need to generate. Very simple, and they get the information they want. And again, the power is that they're not interrupting engineering, and they can get the information when they need it, which it becomes the scheduling between the 2 departments become difficult in some cases. So with that, I can answer any questions, and I'll pass it back to Norm. And I think since this is the end of the presentation, we'd better take some audio questions too there, Norm.
Okie dokie. Yeah, if you could take a look at the question queue, I see a few coming in as well. So that does more or less conclude our presentation, although we'll take some questions for a few more minutes. We've got time. I do want to emphasize that we recognize this is a new product line. It's very powerful, as you can see, very sophisticated. So one of the things we're doing with the initial release of this product is we will be supporting this at, I would say, at a higher level for customization in terms of if you need assistance to create new functions, new work packages, we want to be involved with helping you do that. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. Furthermore, we do want to start pulling together information sort of in organized fashion in the KB to publish examples and other types of things as we build up a library of real-world use cases and stuff like that. So we do intend on organizing that. I don't believe we have that set up in the KB just yet, or at least not an extensive library as yet, but there will be. So it will be a lot of hands-on support. After today, certainly encourage you to, if you want to have an open discussion, to encourage you to go to the Augie Marine Forum that was set up a couple of months back. Or if you want a private conversation directly with us, just submit your questions through the Nexus client care system. And of course, if you're interested in training opportunities, consulting services, or licensing and sales, contact your local SSI dealer. That would be the SSI USA office in the US, Inno Marine in Canada, and your dealer elsewhere. We do have another webinar scheduled in a few weeks. On November 19th will be Weld Management. Same time, same place. And you can see the registration information there as well. We'll also be publishing, it's already published on our Nexus Bulletins project and our website. So if you want to take some more questions there, Dennis, we will open up the mics if you like, but just put up your hand in the go-to interface and we can open your microphone if you like.
Yeah, so one question here. We need to summarize data from assemblies and units. I didn't see any evidence of that in the presentation. Can you address this? So when you're saying summarizing data from assemblies and units, I suspect that is something to do with reports. Well, any of the reports that we actually were generating from even some of the output that I had was able to, as long as you have a bill of materials, define what the data that you want to generate for that assembly. You just simply have to select the assembly and select the operation that is using the appropriate bill of materials, and you will generate the TSV file that you actually require. So another question, they were asking if you need any extra software to view the reports that are generated from the PublisherLT. Well, one of the things that we do with the PublisherLT is that we know that a lot of people, when they do reporting, they report via Excel file. So the file that we generate is a TSV file, mostly, and that's a tab separated file, and that can be opened natively in Excel. So once that file is generated, any program that can open up a TSV file, this can be a Notepad, Excel, Zoe was showing you another one that's a CSV viewer, I believe, was able to open that, that report. So there is no extra licensing or products you have to purchase per se to open those reports. And there was just a comment also here about the example I gave of opening assembly drawings or creating a drawing of an assembly, of parts from an assembly. But you can actually create it from any other type of part. So from my example that I gave from the parts that have actually changed in the last week, I was able to create a drawing from that criteria. But in essence, what you want, I guess the takeaway from that is that you could create a drawing from virtually any criteria in ShipConstructor. So my first example where I gave where you want a drawing representation and some bill of materials of your weapon system and all the supporting structure, you're able to create your criteria, get that information, and create that output that you require for that, that portion of the project. Or again, if you want to do it for your compartment or zone, for painting, or just for analysis for your weight engineers, you're able to do that as well. So virtually any way you can filter information, you can create output from that. Yeah, so what would happen, so the question was, so these people that are getting the reports, would they need PublisherLT? Well, there's several workflows that you can actually, that you can implement in your organization. So if you want these other departments to generate their own reports so that they would open up PublisherLT and generate the operation, they would obviously need a PublisherLT license. If you want those reports to be pushed by your engineering team is the only one that would have to require the PublisherLT. But ideally, what and it will depend on each organization, you probably would want the person requesting that information to be able to generate the information themselves if they do it you know, often enough. If they only do it once every 2 months or once a month, then you might want to upload that to someone that's familiar with PublisherLT. But if they're requesting that information once a week for weekly reports or weekly Navisworks files, giving them access to the PublisherLT and then again empowering themselves to help themselves when they need the information will probably overall in the organization be a little bit more efficient, because distractions are very costly, and people are always asking for information when you're at the end of a deadline and you really need to hit your deadline, so you don't have time to generate the information they require. Yeah, so people outside, so there's a question if people outside of ShipConstructor or outside of the engineering require to have ShipConstructor knowledge, and you're correct, they do not need to know ShipConstructor. As you can see with PublisherLT, there's not very much ShipConstructor specific data in there. The only real ShipConstructor specific data is the product hierarchy, but the product hierarchy is a very common structure that everyone's familiar with. It's just a simple tree structure. So selecting your criteria by assemblies or stuff that has changed in a specific compartment or zone, again, a lot of those stuff can be saved and persisted, so they don't have to change anything or enter anything in each time they select the operations. So any person can actually run ShipConstructor even if they have no ShipConstructor knowledge. So the question was, how long does the training session last? Pretty much the training session that we have with the PublisherLT is very, very low. There is usually a little bit more of a working together after we do the training. So the training usually would take anywhere from an hour to 4-hour session, just kind of stepping a little bit through. We have a lot of documentation of the operations, but SSI, we're really committed to making sure that you get what you want. So we're working with clients to make sure they get the operations that they're trying to achieve. So the training would be very basic at the beginning, and then we'll progress by them asking questions about, okay, this is the output that I need, or this is the information I need, and then we would work with them to generate that operation. And the thing is once the operation is generated, it can be leveraged and reused without even looking at that operation. And what we're trying to do too is that if there's any questions or comments of like general ideas of operations, we're trying to make it publicly available. So even on Augie, if you have a question of a particular operation, you can ask a question on Augie, as well as we're having a knowledge base, and we're putting a lot of operations on our knowledge base, so that we might be answering it for a particular person, as long as it doesn't have their competitive advantage for trade secrets. If it's publicly accessible or can be beneficial to the public, we would make it publicly available on our knowledge base. So once you start seeing that, you can kind of see what other operations are possible. Because again, I think the biggest challenge we have with PublisherLT is it just does so much, and really knowing how it can actually be leveraged in an organization can be quite difficult. Or it's just, I think it's bigger than just what you're doing today. There's a lot more output and process that you can improve than what you're just doing today. I think that's pretty much all the questions there, Norm.
Well, can we wrap it up? Mm-hmm. No, that's fine. I don't see any others. I think we've done a good job. Okay, well, we'll call it a day then. Thank you, everyone, for your time. We appreciate it. And once again, if you have more questions, you know where to go. Again, Nexus or the Augie Marine Forum. Be happy to answer them there. Thank you very much.